Okay, we're back again, and today it looks like I have some questions waiting for me. So I'm going to go over those first. All right. Let's see about today's video. Talk about illusions. Yuri says, one thing that I've noticed even before training is that we're able to almost hear a word inside of a pitch if we want to. Yeah. For example, if you can hear the B flat when you hear at the same time you think. No, absolutely. That's actually a technique, because when I teach audiation, one of the things we start with is we start by just having people listen to one tone, like a drone. And then depending on the person's ability, we either have them try and add a second line. So maybe you hear the drone like this, and then you hear another pitch, not at the same time, just slightly after. The other option is to actually hear a rhythm at the same time as a drone. So yeah, if I understand what you're saying, absolutely. You can hear a B flat drone and then a word, or even somebody speaking. You can hear an entire symphony. I mean, if you develop the ability, you can hear anything in your mind. It's absolutely one of those things, no question, that is 100% attainable. The level of clarity might depend on a little bit of talent, a little bit of practice, and a little bit of familiarity, how long you've been practicing this. So it does get better. Audiation gets better. The problem with audiation is that we can actually teach audiation pretty quickly. I can teach you to start hearing things within a week. And then there's lots of techniques to get you to go deeper and deeper and deeper to the point where you're starting to actually hear, if not simulate, overtones and try and hear what an actual concert quality sounds like. But that's something that takes a lot of time. And that's why, to get to that level, I've created this 52-week. It's just one lesson a week. It's like having private lessons, the composing hour, inner ear training. Because what I was doing is I was teaching this course live. I was teaching this in my private lessons. And I said, this is kind of a waste of time, because my students are paying me for composition lessons. I'm teaching them an essential skill. Absolutely, you need to be able to audiate if you want to be a composer, I think. But I'm wasting time because I keep teaching the same concept over and over again. So let's put it into a course. So I started with my big video series, which I spent a lot of time thinking about and putting the exercises together, but it requires a little bit more thought. And so I wanted something that was even simpler. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to create audio only, because I've been hearing from people on the channel and customers and students that are taking my course, they really like the audio only version of things. So we start with the audio only, and then actually the composing hour was video first. And then I said, I'm going to make it even simpler. I'm going to make it so you don't have to do any assignments. I'm going to make it so you don't have to write anything down. I'm going to teach you audiation by just listening to an audio file and following along with the exercises. And over the course of 52 weeks, we gradually open up your ear. But absolutely, one of the things that we can do with that is, I actually recommend at some point to actually hear the sound of somebody familiar to you and see if you can actually hear that person's voice in your head. So no, it's not a stretch at all. It's actually very simple to just add, in your case, the word B flat. So he goes on to say the word B flat. You'll start to hear this word when you hear the B flat, but it doesn't last forever. I notice it while training relative pitch, for example. I just think we're making it too complicated here. I mean, yeah, you can do things like that, and you can audiate C, C, and hear C along with it. You can do that, but how does that help you with perfect pitch? Maybe it helps you, and if it does, that's fantastic. I am not here to say there's only one way to do this. There's not. Oh, you couldn't hear that. So here's your C. You're kind of going C, C. That's one way to do it. And I'm not saying that you can't learn perfect pitch that way, but I do think it's like putting a big brick wall between you and the skill you want, because essentially what's happening here is you are adding extra information that is not within the tone itself. It goes back to that same thing with, muscle memory, vocal tension, jaw tension, feeling it in different places on your head. All of these things are an extra layer of sensory input that get in the way of you actually developing the skill that you are trying to develop. That's my opinion, you know? And it's my opinion, but it's also based on, well, almost a decade in the university working with students to develop their ears, and many decades, well, a couple more decades before that, just doing it myself. Anytime I tried to use a gimmick or a trick, guess what? It was a gimmick or trick. I could hear things when I used a gimmick or trick, but then once I tried to hear actual music, it wasn't working. So that's why I don't recommend that stuff. But again, if that's helpful for you, who am I to say you can't do it? Go for it. Try it out. See if it works. So continues 2/5, one chord progression. Okay. I used to sing these words together to the chord progression. So when I heard it, these words appeared in the sound. I mean, I get what you're saying. I appreciate it. And I think that's great that you're doing that. It's just not a technique I would personally use. But again, this is one of those things where this is my opinion. It's a little more than opinion. It's based on tons of research. It's based on tons of experience. It's based on what I know is achievable in the realm of relative pitch. And I'm somewhat applying it based on my knowledge of lots and lots of students that I've worked with that had perfect pitch. We'd have conversations, I'd talk to them, I'd see similarities between their experiences. And I'm now applying some of that information to what I'm doing here with these experiments. But the thing is, I just think that it's like I said earlier, you're adding that wall between where you are and the ability you want. And maybe if that wall is more of a bridge, that could be a way to do it if that helps you. And everybody's going to be a little different, but I have found that the best way to train the ear is to focus on the actual sounds. It's a little bit harder at first, but the long-term results far outweigh it. And so my philosophy when it comes to ear training is you can go fast. I can say, hear this, try and hear this chord, try and hear this chord progression. Okay, now do this, now do this. And it can be all these exciting exercises. They're just going all over the place, right? And I can make it fun and I can make it entertaining. And 6 months to a year of that, you'll have an okay ear because you will have learned something. Or we can be a little bit boring, a little bit repetitive. We can truly build the ear from the ground up, and we can take our time and we can focus on hearing things the way that you actually need to hear them for it to be practical in actual music. So if I'm sitting here in an ensemble, I need to know that the cornets or the trumpets are slightly flat, and I need to be able to hear that the first cornet and the second cornet are not playing in tune and know which one is actually out of tune. If I'm a conductor, I need to know that so I can sort of try and push them in the right direction. And that doesn't come, I think, from putting extra information into the mix, because if you are constantly trying to devise ways to add extra information to be able to hear something, then you always have to get through that extra information. Does that make sense? And so I prefer a very step by step approach. I spend the majority of my time thinking, okay, so this was this lesson. Does it reinforce the skills I want it to reinforce? I have kind of a checklist of things that I go through in my mind. And once all those things are met, before I create the next lesson, I think, okay, we did this last time. Now, how can I reinforce that? Assume that the student's going to take one lesson per day, so we gradually improve the knowledge. How can I do it so that it's an incremental increase, but it is an increase, so that we are not going up a mountain like this, but we're going up a slow hill that gradually gets bigger and bigger. And then, the curve starts to get higher at the end. This is the way all of my courses have ever worked. When I would teach things in the university, I would start with paradigms. Those are things that are basically like simplified explanations for progressions, for example. So 1-4-5-1. I show them what a 1 chord, a 4 chord, a 5 chord, and 1 chord looks like. I show them the voice leading. I take it out of the music. And then towards the end of the semester, what do? Once they have all this kind of knowledge, I then show them actual music, and we analyze one piece after another, after another, after another. And that's when things click. But if I just analyze music, which is what I know a lot of people do, they're like, we're in music, we should be analyzing music. I agree. But if you just analyze music from the beginning, you know what you end up with? You end up with people that have questions, that people that don't really know how the seventh chord resolves in the classical period. You have people that don't understand how stepwise motion helps to create a more effective line, and how when you have a skip or a leap, that's something to pay attention to. Theory doesn't teach this. Analysis doesn't teach it in a clear-cut way. And so I very much believe in starting with the components we're going to use for later lessons. And then in the later lessons, we bring those components together in a practical way. And that's where the real learning begins. Okay. So thank you for these questions. I think I love the way that Yuri is constantly thinking about this and trying to relate it to his own experiences, and they're very valid experiences, and I think it's great. I just have a different methodology. And so if you're asking me my opinion, you can hear a B flat and hear the note name or the word at the same time you hear B flat. And maybe that helps you create an association. What I'm suggesting is don't create associations. Just hear what things sound like on their own. So we're going to go through here. Feel free to chat in the chat if you want to ask me any other questions. I've got it turned on and I can kind of see it here on the side. But what I want to talk about real quick are some of these common illusions. But before we do that, I want to make sure I get through the training because I got a little bit of time today. So we're still working with B flat, C, D, E, and F sharp. This is day 27. So tomorrow I'm going to add the G sharp, or what perfect pitch people probably call it, A flat. They view the G sharp as being somehow softer, so a lot of them tend to want to call it A flat rather than G sharp, just what I've noticed. So first, just start by trying to hear a C in your mind. Don't hum it, don't sing it, don't do anything. Don't build a wall between you and the sound. Okay, here's your C. You might hear my child in the background. If you got it wrong, just go ahead and audiate again and correct yourself. Now let's do a little bit of a warm-up. Somebody yesterday said, okay, well, the moment you give me a pitch, relative pitch shakes over and it's all done. I'm done. And I get that because I have a really good relative pitch and it's hard to turn that off. But it's not that you have to turn off the relative pitch. Don't do that. See through the relative pitch and add another dimension to it. So if I now play the C and then I play this note here, well, if you have really good perfect pitch, relative pitch, you know that's a major second away. So you immediately know it's a B flat. But you can hear it deeper, on a deeper level. This is why in the Flawless course we start with these little meditations, because I am teaching tone awareness in that course, but it's not the goal. It's just kind of a thing where if in the course you can develop a little bit of tone awareness, then that's going to be awesome. That's going to help your relative pitch a little bit. But you don't need tone awareness to have relative pitch. Okay. So if you're using relative pitch, you hear the C, you know what it is, and then you instantly know it's a B flat. Fine. You know it's a B flat. That's great. You have a good ear for relative pitch. I'd argue it's a very good thing to have. It's a flexible ear. But there's something else you can do here too. So you know what the note is because of relative pitch. But can you still hear a difference between the notes? So now that you know that's a B flat, can you hear something about the B flat that makes it B flat? What makes it B flatty, And don't use words or anything like that. Just recognize that, I recognize it's a major second, but also there's a quality to these notes. because you know if you're going to develop perfect pitch, it's kind of this slow and steady race here. I think it would take a long time, but you'll gradually sort of acclimate the ear to hear these subtle qualities potentially along with relative pitch. I would not advocate anybody try and replace their relative pitch with perfect pitch. I personally have seen in action people with really exceptional perfect pitch are kind of on the outside. Those are pretty rare because most people with perfect pitch aren't really exceptional because it hasn't been trained. The ones that have been trained, like Rick Beato's kid, he's been trained. You know, his daughter has been trained. He at least he said he's trained them, right? So they have somebody with a lot of skill and knowledge training them and training them in a very effective way because they have really refined perfect pitch. It's been developed. It's not just natural meaning learned at an early age most likely, but it's also reinforced with education. Okay, so the average person with perfect pitch and the average person with relative pitch, you know, the person with perfect pitch is seemingly going to have the advantage, but the person with relative pitch isn't going to get tied up in loops because they can always just hear the relationships. And so when you pit somebody who I would say is a similar ability with perfect pitch and relative pitch together, the person with relative pitch, once they know the starting note or a note, tends to move a little bit more quickly, a little more fluidly. They're hearing their relationships and not just the actual pitches. They can tell when a B flat's at different octaves. There's a drill I want to do with you someday where we do it in the composing hour, but you start to lose the sense of the octave and you actually start to have trouble telling if something's going up an octave or down an octave. It's one of these things that it's like an illusion, what we're kind of talking about today. So you'd think an octave, second one's lower than the first, would be really easy in all instances, but there's ways to kind of trick the mind, and this is what happens in real music. So somebody with perfect pitch is kind of always confused by those illusions unless it's been trained. They're always kind of like, it's a B flat, you know, what octave register it is, they have to think for a second. But somebody with relative pitch, first one was higher than the second one. It's quicker in some ways. So, you know, I don't think that you want to get rid of that. So if you have relative pitch, don't lose it, but add to it. Start with tone awareness. And maybe the goal is perfect pitch, but honestly, very few instances. Actually, kind of funny. My daughter is 2 years old and she's starting to read. And so she was in my office yesterday and she picked up this Beethoven, the Tovi, you know, analysis. And she said, read it to me. And so it was one of the first times where I actually kind of wish I did have perfect pitch because we opened up to this page here. I don't know if you can see that. And so I sang it to her, ba dun 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 dun, you know, and I don't know if I started on a C. I didn't, but I in that moment was thinking, actually, it'd be kind of nice if I did have perfect pitch there. And I think I may have sang it in major because I didn't look at the key, but I started singing those melodies to her. And it was kind of a different way of reading. But the point is, you know, I don't have perfect pitch, so I didn't know if I could start on the right note, but did it matter? Probably not. So let's talk a little, let's go through these exercises real quick, and then I'm going to talk about some illusions and maybe how to overcome them a little bit. I've jotted down a few different ideas and a few different things that I keep hearing over and over again. So today, let's just talk about them as much time as I have to do it. All right, so here is your C. Just listen to the B flat. We're going to do a warm up. All right, remember, predict, listen, audiate. So prediction's an audiation, and then audiate is an audiation. So you're hearing the note first. I said we're B flat, so you're trying to hear the B flat in your mind. Then I correct it for you or affirm it for you. And then you play it back in your mind again once you've heard the correct note. So we're going to go with B flat. Hear it. correct it, listen. Hear it, correct it, listen. Get it? I'm not going to talk. Staying on B flat till I tell you we're moving on. Move into C. Hear it? D. Replicate anything unique about it that you could hear. See, even if you have relative pitch, you can still do that, right? This is E. Sorry. Hear it in your mind. Replicate it in your mind. Do it again. Again. And the next note. F sharp. Okay, now I'm going to mix them up a little bit. I'm not going to scramble them because I actually want you to maintain. If you're using relative pitch but you're not thinking about it, that's fine. But if you're using relative pitch, even if you're not thinking about it, still try and hear the color of the note, whatever stands out to you. So try and identify the note that I play. Okay, that's a D. B flat. D. B flat. If you hear a pterodactyl in the background, sorry, that's the child. How about this note? C. Just close your eyes, relax, don't try and listen too deeply. D. Just identify the notes. B flat. C. D. C. B flat. D. C. B flat. Add another note. E. D. B flat. E. One more note. F sharp. E. F sharp. D. Okay, now we're going to do something else. I'm going to basically play two tritones. So you identify if it's a B flat or the C. Listen to the quality of this tritone. That one's B flat, and this one, same interval, but do you notice a difference in quality? flat. C, we'll identify it by the bass note because that's usually how we analyze things in music. We always use the bass note in most cases. There's exceptions like tonic pedals and things like that. All right, now I'm going to split it up over the keyboard. Tell me if you hear a C or B flat. C. B flat. C. B flat. B flat. C. C. B flat. So do you hear the difference in quality? C. B flat. And you can probably hear it with pretty good accuracy without really thinking throughout the entire range of the keyboard here. C. B flat. And that's kind of what we're going for. That should be the experience of perfect pitch, is you can just hear. C. B flat. Same interval, different characters. All right. So the last thing we're going to do is I'm going to say a note, and I want you to hear it, and then I'll play it and then correct. D. F sharp. E. F sharp. D. E. C. B flat. Now let's switch it. I'm going to play a note. Tell me what you hear. E. B flat. F sharp. C. If you're hearing with relative pitch, fine, but try and hear quality too. D. E. B flat. F sharp. Okay. So that's all I really want to do today. I actually have other exercises for perfect pitch that I'd like to try at some point, but let's talk about the topic of this, some common illusions and how to overcome them. So one of them is this idea that you're born with it. So the illusion is effectively that perfect pitch is untrainable. It's an innate gift. The reality, based on what we've seen in some research studies and some practical application, is that early exposure does give a huge advantage. There's no arguing that. Adults can improve absolute pitch memory with consistent training. It has to be kind of sensory based. So it's the opposite of what I'm telling you to do. Sensory based would be, I feel it in my throat. I feel it in my mouth. I feel it in a part of my body, right? That has been shown to establish what the researchers define as perfect pitch. So you may disagree with that as a term for perfect pitch, but when they do these experiments, you always have to look at the experiment because they define the terms they're going to use. And perfect pitch is often just defined as the ability to recall a note without hearing it first. So if I say sing a C and somebody sings a C, for a lot of these research studies, they'll say that person has perfect pitch. It doesn't get into the subtleties of people with actual perfect pitch where they can just hear it. So the idea here, I was actually talking with someone about this yesterday, you can compare it a little bit to wine tasting or coffee tasting, right? Most people can't name vintages at first, but they can learn to recognize these flavors over time. So you can learn to really recognize like lemongrass and all these different flavors. But you have to be introduced to them first, and you have to have experience with them. And then from there, you can start to taste the different flavors, like in coffee. You know, I used to work at Starbucks and when I was in college. And one of the things that we did was we had these little coffee passport books, and we had to go through and write tasting notes for each coffee. We're supposed to just take a coffee each shift or each day. I don't know if we were allowed to do it on our shift, but I actually think they did let us do it on our shift back then. And we'd taste a coffee and write tasting notes. And there was no real follow up on that. It's just if you wrote the tasting notes, you were good. You know, they didn't make it too complicated. But the follow up would be taste that coffee again every day for a week. See if you can bring out some of the flavors that you noticed the first day. Perfect pitch training, I don't think is that much different, and neither is relative pitch training. At first, perfect fifth, you hear it as clear, somewhat stable. And then you start to recognize it in different contexts. You know, it's the same thing. These are all perfect fifths. Those are all perfect fifths. So you can gradually start to acclimate yourself to it. There's also this idea where we start to confuse perfect pitch with musical skill. And this is the one that I think really needs to be talked about a little bit. There's this idea that perfect pitch automatically makes you a great musician. It's not true. Don't want to. Perfect pitch is not the only requirement for being a great musician. If you have perfect pitch, that doesn't mean you understand phrasing. If you have perfect pitch, that doesn't mean you understand motivic development in a piece. Perfect pitch doesn't teach you how to emphasize certain aspects of a form. It doesn't teach you how to play with dynamic intensity. It doesn't teach you so many things about music. You could have perfect pitch and be one of the driest players on the planet. You know, not much better than a notation program where you press play and it plays all the notes for you. Perfection, perhaps, but not real. Missing a lot of the inharmonicity, not N, but in harmonicity, and missing a lot of other techniques that musicians develop over time that go beyond perfect pitch. Perfect pitch is useful for a starting point in a lot of cases, but it's a recognition skill, okay? Perfect pitch just allows you to recognize things in music. It's not creativity or expression. I think that's really important to note. So you can have perfect pitch with poor phrasing, bad intonation, or weak musicianship. You can have kind of this overemphasized perfect pitch where you have determined this is the only intonation I'll accept. And if the choir is a half step down in a performance, it's very hard for you to just go with it, you know? Whereas for someone with relative pitch, they'll be happy to just sing. They may notice something's wrong if they have a little bit of tone awareness, but it's not going to affect their ability to perform the piece, except that maybe it falls different in the register, and that would be an issue. But if an orchestra tunes slightly flat or sharp, it's not going to affect somebody that doesn't have perfect pitch, you know? It may make some notes feel a little weird while they're playing, but it's not going to be the end of the world. Someone with perfect pitch would kind of get stuck and maybe try and raise the pitch back up. Another illusion that I wrote down here is thinking it's just about naming notes. So the idea here, the illusion, is that if you can name notes, you have perfect pitch. That's the idea here. And that's not true. If I can name notes, I may have relative pitch. I may have one note that I can recognize in my voice that is my consistent C, and then I use my relative pitch to figure out all the other notes. So true internal tone recognition is about replicating the exact internal sound, not just labeling it. So can I hear what's happening out in the world, and then can I replicate it? You know, something like that. So this is kind of like the difference between native perfect pitch and then maybe what's learned later as an adult. And what I'm trying to do here is something a little different. I'm not trying to develop the ability to name notes. That's a form of perfect pitch, depending on your definition of perfect pitch, that some might accept. I'm more interested in, can I hear the different qualities of the tones without relating it to anything else? I don't have to relate red to green to know that red and green are different. I don't have to relate big to small to know generally if something's big or something's small. There's always gray area. Like, when does big become small, you know? But generally speaking, on the outer edges, I can tell when something's small, I can tell when something's big. You know, it's that kind of thinking. Another illusion is ignoring context dependence. So the idea that once you know a note, you'll always recognize it instantly. This kind of perfection is where kind of these myths of perfect pitch come from. There's a lot of things that can get in the way. Fatigue, the timbre, the environmental noise, all this can throw you off. That is why in my relative pitch course, and even right now, I don't care if you hear squeaking chairs or you hear rain or you hear some pin drop in the audio, because I'm convinced that one of the reasons why many ear training programs don't work is because they're not based in reality. They don't have a child screaming in the background to distract you, you know? In real life, when you're composing and when you're performing, there's going to be people fidgeting in their chairs. Your stand partner is going to be moving papers around, maybe writing stuff in the score, making noise, shuffling in the seat. All this is part of the distraction that you have to hear through to get to the core. And that's why if I were doing an audio recording, a performance, yeah, I'd want all that stuff gone. I want the purest recording possible. But for relative pitch, perfect pitch, any type of training, the distractions are useful. I used to actually hate it at first when maintenance at the university would start blowing around in the yard while I was trying to do an ear training session or, you know, something like that. It was always distracting. But then I said, you know what, let's just focus through the distraction, use it as a challenge. And the results were better. So in my opinion, distractions are good. Don't worry about them. Distortion's good. Hear through the distortion, get to the root of the note. That will enhance your focus and enhance your ear. I firmly believe that. So the other thing, this is a little bit of an illusion. This over-reliance on relative pitch, kind of like what somebody said yesterday. So if you can compare something to a known note, you're doing perfect pitch, right? So if I play an F sharp, but I already heard the C, I'm hearing that F sharp and somehow that's perfect pitch. And there are many ways to actually be deceptive about this. Like if you wanted to say that you have perfect pitch, there's so many ways you could do it. Even just having a little tuning fork or the ding of a particular button on your sweater can be enough for somebody with really good perfect pitch to mimic somebody with perfect pitch. I meant relative pitch. So like you can actually have a button or something that makes a very particular tone. There are many ways to do this, which is why it doesn't matter if somebody online is doing perfect pitch exercises and they seem like they're really good at it. I'm like, cool, that was a fun video, but I don't really get that impressed by it because I know there are so many different ways you can mimic perfect pitch. And it's like a magician. You know, I could be standing right in front of a magician and not know the trick they're using to make the bunny come out of the hat. I can look at the hat, I can look for a false bottom, I can do all this stuff, and I can't figure it out. But it is a trick. It's not magic. It's the same thing with people that learn to mimic perfect pitch. It's like a party trick. And humans are very good at stuff. We can get really good with just a little bit of information, and then we can start to identify other notes off that. So if you're doing something like that, great. You've got a little button with the note of an A. You effectively have really great relative pitch if you can do that. And you're effectively doing a little bit of perfect pitch. You have perfect pitch if you have that device that makes that tone, but it's not real perfect pitch, right? So the one true method trap, this is really important. And it's one of those things where, if you give me your suggestions, I love hearing about them. I'll try them out. But I have a certain philosophy about what it is that I'm trying to accomplish and what I'm trying to prove. And a lot of the things I've heard, I've heard, I recently went through Burge's perfect pitch course, and I know all those techniques, but I'm going to discount a lot of them simply because they could be muscle memory, they could be something else, and could be 100% right, that these turn into perfect pitch at one point. But I'm interested in a particular approach, which is that I hear the quality and nothing else. And I'm trying really hard not to introduce other things. And I probably am introducing other elements that help me identify them. And over time, I'll figure that out and I will refine this approach, But there's this idea that there's a single correct training method for perfect pitch or relative pitch. It's not true. When I train with the Flawless program, I'm training you in a system that I have found to work for, at this point, it's not inaccurate to say thousands of students. And it's worked for them. And so I have a certain philosophy about how it should be taught. And I believe that of the other programs I've evaluated, and I've looked at a lot of different programs because when I was teaching, I wanted to get better at teaching, right? And so I really evaluated different systems to see if any of them worked. And I felt like they all skipped steps. And when you skip steps, like all of a sudden you go from hearing a first inversion triad, something like, if you hear a first inversion triad and then all of a sudden they move, the piano's not going to work right now, and then all of a sudden you move the root, or the bass note, then all of a sudden you can't hear it. So you can hear first inversion triad when it's in close position, but when it's extended, so here's close position. Let me just turn this on real quick. Okay. You can hear the fourth in the top, and you can identify it. But what happens when things get really spread apart? So now you have to change tactics and you have to listen for the third, but you weren't trained to listen for the third before. You were trained to listen for the fourth. And it skips the steps in between that allows you to start to hear the root, third, and fifth of a chord. So it's things like that. And so I just believe that the system I'm using is more step by step, and it can always be more step by step, and you'll find a program that works great for you, and you should stick with it if you do. But I believe rather than going through 50 different programs and getting a certain individual result with each one, I'm trying to create a program that covers much more territory so that when you're done with it, you have the type of ear that can keep learning just from listening to music. That's what I've experienced, and that's what I want you to be able to experience. I don't really do ear training anymore, except with composition, or that's my ear training, is composing music or listening to music. I'll hear something I haven't heard before. I'm like, oh, what is that? And I try and hear it in real time. That's where ear training should take you. Once you're at the point where you can start to hear these things at a pretty good level, then you really don't need ear training anymore because you're doing it all the time. Okay? And expecting linear progress. This is a big one. So practice, this idea that practice will lead to steady improvement every single week. Okay, that's not true either. I have seen this happen with myself and with others. I remember one of the very first challenges I had with ear training. I was trying to hear the difference between a fifth and a fourth. And to hear all my intervals, I created like 2,000 different audio files that would play the intervals in different octave registers and different rhythms and things like that. And then I put them on shuffle. I'd have playlists for each one. So the perfect fifth and perfect fourth playlist I had going for maybe 8 minutes, right? And I couldn't do it. And so I remember I kept coming back to it each day. And I was like, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to hear this. It's actually David Lucas Burgess' course where I did this first. He had this exercise where there's a fourth and a fifth. I was like, you're crazy. I'm never going to be able to hear that. But I kept doing it. And then one day, all of a sudden, I realized, oh, I passed that drill really quickly. And it was like an 8-minute drill. It was over 8 minutes. So it wasn't that I memorized anything because I wasn't trying to memorize. So that wasn't it. And then when I heard another drill later that he did with fourths and fifths, I did remarkably better. I didn't have the same errors. And then when I started to hear the major third, I can never unhear it now, once I've learned it. So what happened though was like 2 weeks of constant failure. 2 weeks of just being like, can't hear it, can't hear it, can't hear it. I hear it even less. I really can't hear it. It's even worse. So it wasn't linear, except that it was linear getting worse. And then some days I'd hear a few and it popped through. And then it'd get worse. And then other day, and then I'd come back and I'd keep going. And eventually one day it kind of snapped. And ever since then, I have never confused a fourth or a fifth, unless it's in a really muddy register, or if it's with a timbre that's slightly off, or if they're slightly out of tune in an orchestra, maybe I have some trouble hearing it. But in general, that was not a linear progression. I didn't just get a little better at hearing it every day. And so that's the idea behind the Flawless course, is you kind of get the same exercises each day. You'll see that I modify them to keep the interest up and to keep the challenge, and I do that at very specific intervals. But for the most part, you just keep training each day, and you may not notice the improvement until all of a sudden you go back and you're like, oh wow, yeah, I can do this drill. I thought I could. I didn't think I'd ever be able to do it, and now all of a sudden I'm hearing what you're talking about. So that's what ear training is. It's not linear. There's going to be plateaus. There's going to be sudden jumps in skills, and then you're going to forget some of the stuff you've learned. All these phases are normal, and they're on the way to mastery. If you're not failing, you're not learning. Okay, that's really, I don't know who said that, but it's true. You need to fail like 1,000 times and then you're going to get it right. But that's what makes somebody who succeeds different from somebody who fails. The person that just keeps going, they don't quit. You just have to take this mindset of, I don't care how I do today. All I care about is that I do it. I don't care if I'm tired. I don't care if it's been a hard day and I just want to go to sleep. I'm going to go and spend 10 minutes and do some ear training before I do that. I can afford 10 minutes, and you do what you can, but you do it every day. That's what's going to lead to the progress and the skills that you want that others won't develop, because you have to be able to say, it doesn't matter my mood. I'm just going to press play on something and do some ear training, and then I can be done for the day. Even if you're passively listening and you're not fully into it. It's just that discipline of trying to do it each day, kind of like what I'm doing with this perfect pitch stuff. I've come in every day for 30 days. I will very soon, right? I did not miss a single day. These sessions end up going 20 minutes to an hour. This one's longer because I'm getting near the end. I want to talk about some things for you to think about, right? But I'm doing it. There have been many days I had family visiting, and the person who was visiting was actually in this room where I do my recording, but I still found 30 minutes to come in and do this. And I'm doing that because it's important to show that you gotta make time for the things that are a priority. You have to be able to sit down and say, this matters. I'm going to make sure it happens, even if you only do it for a few minutes. So just know This is kind of my illusion talk. I'm going to be talking about some other things. We're going to keep meeting at 12:30. What I was doing partially in this 30 days is trying to figure out a time that would actually work where I could mostly make it work with the schedule. And I found that 12:30 is a good time. So going forward, for now, I've got a podcast starting on Tuesday. That's going to be the day after this perfect pitch thing ends. And we're going to talk about different topics in music theory, ear training, all kinds of fun stuff. So you'll be able to get it here on YouTube, or you can get it on Apple iTunes, Spotify. It's everywhere. So enjoy that, and we'll look forward to that. Those will be at 12:30 on Tuesdays, Thursdays, or Tuesdays and Fridays. Just look for the announcement. I post it. It's in my schedule. Let's see what I got here. It's not on my schedule yet. It'll be in my schedule. But I believe it's going to be Tuesdays. I know it's Tuesdays, and then I think Fridays. Actually, it might be Tuesdays and Thursdays. Well, I'll confirm that, and I'll put a link in the description for you. So if you have any questions, just post a comment. Let me know how you're doing. And I hope this was helpful for you. I will see you again tomorrow.